While there are as many reasons for following the path of the necromancer as there are ways to die, the vast majority of those that delve into necromancy study the deep and forbidden secrets to raise the dead. After all, the dead always outnumber the living no matter what world you find yourself on. Therein lies the mystery of our monster today, the living. Necromancy, by its definition, requires the living, at least initially. The bread and butter spell of the necromancer, Animate Dead, requires the bones and corpse of a once living humanoid, imbuing it with foul necrotic energies until it raises up as an undead creature. If any spark of life, no matter the form it takes, can be snuffed out and raised as an undead version of itself, then perhaps even the elements themselves aren't safe from the claws of undeath. The Breath Stealer, the oxymoronic embodiment. Let's talk about the Voidwraith. So, what are we going to be covering? In this episode, we're going to first talk about what a Voidwraith is. Next, we're going to delve into its origins, or try to figure out the possible origins for the Voidwraith. After that, we'll explore how I rebuilt the Voidwraith for the 24th edition of D&D and how they fare in combat. We'll close out with some ideas on how to add the Voidwraith not only as a monster of the week, but as part of an ongoing campaign. The Voidwraith originally came to us from the 3rd edition book Libris Mortis, a book that provided a comprehensive overview of the undead in D&D, including, pun very much intended, bringing back creatures from older books. Now, what is a Voidwraith? And more importantly, how can they even exist in the first place? How an elemental becomes undead is a strange thing to think about. It asks a lot of fundamental questions about the nature of life and death in the worlds of D&D. The key one being, are elementals even alive to begin with? The very existence of the Voidwraith implies that to some degree they are. Not life as we traditionally call life, but elemental life is still life, right? It must be. Then there's the next problem with elementals and necromancy. The traditional way to make an undead is you need a corpse for the necrotic energies to take hold in. And elementals don't leave one. Most elementals, when reduced to 0 hit points, simply dissipate and their essence returns to their home plane. Maybe the body of the elemental might dissolve into its constituent elements. Fire might become a burst of flame, water becomes a puddle, earth becomes a pile of dirt, and air becomes a gust of wind, for example. The point is, more often than not, elementals don't leave a usable corpse behind, so there shouldn't be anything for necromancy to get its cold fingers into. But here we are with an example of an undead elemental. There aren't any other canonical undead elementals of the other classic elementals, like the Voidwraith, so there has to be something special about air elementals and whatever makes them undead. Going through their monster entry, there really isn't much to go on for the Voidwraith, but one thing it does say kind of sums it up nicely. Being an undead manifestation of elemental air that hungers for the breath of the living. It also mentions that the Voidwraith shares the Wraith's hatred for all living things. Also, sharing part of the name, the Wraith is an interesting place to start an investigation. Within the worlds of D&D, a Wraith is an undead creature born of evil and darkness, despising light and all living things. Similar to the Voidwraiths, Wraiths have a ghostly spectral appearance since they are of the intangible style of undead. Amorphous and cloud-like, they usually take the form of a snake-like creature rising from the ground, black vapor rolling around them, with 2 glowing red slits for eyes. All of that fits the Voidwraith to a T, strengthening the connection between the two. It gets even better. Voidwraiths drain the life from living creatures, turning them into new wraiths upon death. They can drain life. Which brings us back to our initial question. Are elementals considered alive? At least alive enough, or a type of alive that can be undead? The common denizens of the plane of air is the normal air elemental, which is noted as a being made up of wind and living air. I want to emphasize that living air portion, which sounds like the animating force of the air elementals. It also sounds like something that can be sucked away, perhaps by a similar ephemeral creature. Now, let's say at one point a wraith detected the living air in an air elemental somewhere on the material plane. Living air, I imagine, is gaseous to one degree or another, like the elemental and like the wraith, which is why I think the wraith can be hungry for it and, more importantly, can interact with it. Also, it's why I think Voidwraiths are the only canonical undead of the classic elementals. Anyway, the wraith attacks the air elemental, and ultimately the air elemental falls. In their monster entry, as well as its mechanics, when a wraith drains the life from a once living creature, it rises as a new wraith. The theory here goes that when the living air gets drained away, but before the air elemental's body returns to the elemental plane of air or becomes a breeze, the curse of the wraith fills in that void, pun 100% intended. How does air die? What is the undead version of air? The answer is elegant as it is obvious. The embodiment of vacuum, nothingness, void. If an air elemental is all about the movement of air or wind, the blowing of air, their undead counterpart should be about the sucking of air. Voidwraiths are wraith-like undead whose hunger for the breath of the living is essentially sucking the air out of a person to fill their endless void of hunger. They suck the air out of someone, but that void is vast and eternal, so no amount of air will fill in that hunger. Now, about all that sucking, a lot of the mechanics of the Voidwraith come from both when it was an air elemental and then also some of those wraith aspects that were sprinkled on. As undead air, the Voidwraith has a fast flying movement along with incorporeal movement in order to get anywhere it needs to in a fight or getting ready to start one. Defensively, being both undead and elemental, the Voidwraith has a bunch of resistances and immunities. As a wraith, it gets immunity to necrotic and poison, as well as resistance to the normal weapon damage types. Plus, it also gains resistance to lightning and thunder thanks to its elemental side. Plus, it gains immunity to basically every condition there is in the book, from both sides of its aspects, both undead and elemental. All that together makes this cloud of void surprisingly resilient, especially against its victims who are already struggling to breathe. One notable weakness from its 3.5 incarnation I wanted to keep was kind of how odd of a creature this is, that the Voidwraith is both elemental and undead. So this change that I kept was the Voidwraith can be affected by channel divinities that target either undead or elementals. Yeah, it's not going to come up a lot, but it's a nice bit of flavor for this otherwise undead creature. On the other hand, one thing that will certainly come up is its inescapable craving trait, which is another thing that came from 3.5. It was a ribbon feature that I revamped into giving the Voidwraith a few temporary hit points when a nearby creature fails a Constitution saving throw. And there's going to be more than a few of those. What makes the Voidwraith unique mechanically is its airless aura trait. The Voidwraith's body is surrounded by an aura of vacuum at all times, which means we get to learn about the suffocation rules. In 2024 D&D, the suffocation rule is a creature can hold its breath for a number of minutes equal to 1 plus its Constitution modifier before suffocation begins, When a creature runs out of breath or is choking, it gains an exhaustion level at the end of each of its turns. When a creature can breathe again, it removes all those exhaustion levels that it gained. Now, exhaustion is a dangerous condition to inflict upon players, but given that most adventurers probably have a 3+ or better Constitution modifier, most PCs can hold their breaths, according to this, 4 to 6 minutes, which is 40 to 60 rounds. And if a combat takes 40 to 60 rounds, I assume that the world just imploded at some point. Not the game world, I mean the real world. That being said, the Voidwraith has a few tricks up their sleeve to make suffocation a real threat. The airless aura trait of the Voidwraith means that all breathing creatures within 30 feet of the Voidwraith are in a suffocation hazard. With no air to breathe, a creature must hold their breath when they're close to the Voidwraith. Like I said, most adventurers are going to have a pretty good Constitution modifier, so the airless aura is not going to initially threaten player characters. Initially, anyway. It will cause them problems. First, communication is going to be hampered since you can't speak without risk losing a breath of air. But then it's only going to get worse for the adventurers. Like I said, it's not the airless aura that's going to threaten players. Steel breath will. Whenever a breathing / holding their breath creature takes damage or speaks in the aura, it must make a Constitution saving throw, and on a failed save, the creature instantly begins suffocating as the Voidwraith literally sucks the air out of their lungs. If the creature is already suffocating, it gains 1 exhaustion level as if they were suffocating per the rules. You know what's going to happen a lot during combat? Taking damage, speaking to others, casting a spell. Constitution saving throws tend to be one that PCs are pretty good at though. But if you make enough of them, you're bound to fail, especially after the Voidwraith slams you. The Voidwraith slam does damage, and more importantly, the target suffers disadvantage on their next Constitution saving throw until the end of their next turn. Very straightforward and very devastating, especially combined with the rest of the Voidwraith's traits. A target that takes damage from the slam is going to be in the airless aura. That's going to trigger Steel Breath, which the save is now going to be at disadvantage thanks to the slam. That's going to actually make the odds of an adventure, even a tough adventure, failing and starting to suffocate that much greater. So instead of 40 rounds, it's going to be in the single digits. The slam originally had an ability that did con damage, which, while I'm not against doing ability damage, I felt like it didn't really mean as much since ability damage can be slept off. So I instead went with an ability that would play off the key feature of the Voidwraith, while still fitting in the idea of physically damaging somebody's constitution. Less brutal initially, but still very lethal ability, especially combined with the total Voidwraith package, perfect to terrify players with. Speaking of total package, Voidwraiths are said to be ambush predator, which makes perfect sense given their capabilities. They're hiding in the shadows and able to maneuver about looking for the best spot to get the drop on their prey, which honestly could be from any direction. They have a fast flying speed, which they're capable of hovering. They have incorporeal movement. They have stealth being a trained skill thanks to their high 3.5 skill that they had, and they have high dexterity. That just screams ambush predator. However, unlike a lot of ambush predators, the longer you fight a Voidwraith, the worse off you are. Once the ambush begins, the goal of the Wraith is pretty straightforward. Find a juicy target and get it into your airless aura. One that's ideally by its lonesome. After that, it's all about suffocation thanks to the slam, giving disadvantage to those constitution saving throws. Spellcasters are ideal since they likely will have the damage types that can actually hurt the Voidwraith. Someone fails the first slam, they start suffocating, likely with 4 to 5 rounds to go before they drop to 0. Then the next slam comes and they have dropped to 3 to 4 rounds, or you hit a second target and they start suffocating. Either way, no one's talking, otherwise they're going to risk losing one of their precious rounds, and then rinse and repeat. Honestly, what I love about this fight with the Voidwraith is that players are going to have to learn a whole new set of rules, and they're going to have to learn them real quick. And to me, isn't that the best kind of monster? What can we do with the Voidwraith story-wise? I think with playing how out of left field a Voidwraith is, being both an elemental and undead, is where we can find the Voidwraith's best stories. Anywhere you might use an air elemental, I think you could swap out for a Voidwraith, a terrifying switcheroo for your players. Although they're listed as undead, why not have them show up on the elemental plane of air? The plane of air is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It's a plane of air, but it does have impurities from the other planes of existence, the other elemental planes, the material plane, what have you. Say a powerful wizard summoned a chunk of earth that included a crypt into the air realm to build their tower upon it. In that crypt is a wraith that snags an air elemental, and boom, we get a Voidwraith. Despite the wizard's power, they still need to breathe, and so they fall when the Voidwraith sucks the air right out of their lungs. Do you know the best location to find loot and danger? An abandoned wizard tower. The party could be hired to check out the tower, and so they head into the elemental plane of air, fully expecting to have to deal with air elementals and not an undead one. Voidwraiths can offer a unique take on the tale of looking for a lost person only to find out they're actually a zombie. Perhaps the patron of the party has an air elemental friend that has gone missing. The elemental was sent to invest an ancient crypt looking for a lost relic. The party sets off looking for both the missing elemental and the missing relic. Heading into the tomb, the party is ready to face all manner of corporeal dead, from zombies to skeletons, and maybe there's a wraith there as a hint of what to come. Deep within the crypt, they find a strange cloud and assume it's the missing elemental, unaware that it's getting ready to lure them in until the elemental, the undead elemental, suddenly attacks. Do they kill it? Do they run and inform the patron? Can elementals be raised from the dead? So many questions. We can also use the Voidwraith as a twist to the traditional ghost story. A haunted castle where the party is hired by a noble to clear out whatever's in there. Thanks to their investigation, all signs are pointing to a wraith, which is a logical conclusion given the fact that both the wraiths and the Voidwraiths have very similar capabilities. The party heads in, and the suffocation begins. The tight corridors and small rooms of a castle play to the Voidwraith's capabilities. They have unparalleled movement, being able to go back and forth in the otherwise cramped environment, and having a far easier time getting its victims into its airless aura, since they have far less room to maneuver. With no clear weakness like the Wraith and Sunlight, resistance to most weapons, and the ability to cripple verbal spellcasting, how does the party deal with something like that? The Voidwraith raises some interesting philosophical questions about the nature of life and death in the worlds of Dungeons & Dragons. What counts as being alive? What counts as being dead? Can all life be snuffed out and replaced with narcotic energy to become a twisted version of itself? Air elementals have this living air, and that's what gets sucked out of them in order to become Voidwraiths. What about living embers, living stone, living water, or whatever animates the other elementals? Can that get sucked out of them and they become undead versions? I don't know. Also, if all life can die, does that mean all death can be made alive once more? In the description below, I have a link to the monster stat block for the Voidwraith, updated to the 2024 editions of Dungeons & Dragons, ready for you to unleash upon your unexpected players. Channel update, this marks the 4th video we've officially put out, so happy to hear any feedback on how they're being received. I really hope you're enjoying them. As we are a growing channel, if you found this interesting, please leave a like and please subscribe for all our future videos. It really does mean the world to us. Let me thank all of you for your time and wishing you all the best until we meet again for our next monster.